The sermon this afternoon is titled, Daring Daily, But How? Daring daily, but how? We live, I believe, in a culture that is becoming increasingly secular, even pagan, and the ability to be able to dare daily is going to become much more necessary than ever before. We live in a culture that, like I said, is increasingly pagan, and that is no understatement. So I can think of no better personality to give us an example on how to do this than the prophet Daniel. He lived and was a man of God in a pagan culture, and moreover was one of the men right in the court of the king of Babylon. Reinhard told me right before services that he was in Berlin this week. And I thought, oh, back to Germany. You know, we call it Berlin, so I didn't know he was talking about Ohio. But in Berlin, I visited there a couple of times. You have a replica, partially authentic, partially replica of the Ishtar Gate. The Ishtar Gate was in Babylon and was unearthed by German archaeologists, and ultimately crated up and brought back to Germany. And it's a huge structure. I mean, you've probably seen pictures of it. I maybe should have brought one. You've got this big blue facade with lions on it and an arch, and it is very, very tall. And I've been there. Last time I was there would have been in July of 2017. And I remember walking through it. You walk through there and you think about the fact that the prophet Daniel, who prophesied thousands of years ago, not only walked through that gate, but according to the Bible, sat in it. And Daniel was a daring person. You will probably remember the song, the children's song, Dare to be a Daniel. How many of you learned that song when you were little? Only, this must be an Amish thing, I guess. Only Freeman raised his hand, or did somebody else, a couple of other people? Well, then I'm going to have to sing it, right? I still have that special music to do. I mean, the lyrics go like this: dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, and dare to make it known. That is the refrain of the song that I remember singing when I was a young child. So I'd like to actually use that as a framework for the sermon. It's going to be kind of simple, you know. We'll use that and go back to the Bible and look at what we can do daily based on the example of Daniel to dare to do what he did, is another way of putting it. One of the things that I find increasingly, maybe it's because I'm becoming a little bit more mature, is that most great things get done incrementally. There are huge exploits that people do and huge successes that people do in a moment of time, but most of the things that are done that are sustainable are done incrementally over time. If you look at great athletes, they do a lot of training, and they look at small incremental daily improvements, just tenths of percent. So battles are won and lost by what you get done and what you dare to do daily. And I used the word dare. I guess I borrowed it from this childhood song. But I think what is instructive about this is the fact that only today, and we'll see this in what Daniel did, it is only in the moment that you can dare to do something that makes you maybe just a little bit uncomfortable. If you're not doing something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable, then you're not doing enough. I mean, that's the challenge that I lay out today. If we're not doing something that makes us a little bit uncomfortable, then we're not changing. Then we're not growing. Growing and change is uncomfortable. And again, I'm not talking about doing the wrong thing, okay? Dare to do the right thing. You don't have to look very far in today's world to be able to find something right to do that is counterculture. I mean, that's increasingly the fact. Okay, so let's go to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1, and we'll look at a story here that speaks to the first point, which is to dare to have a purpose firm. Daniel chapter 1. Daniel was of the tribe of Judah. He was of nobility. It is not, the Bible does not say precisely his lineage and all of that, but we do know some things about him. He was somewhere between 13 and 18 years old when he went into captivity. And you think about this, I mean, Daniel had a lot of reasons to be bitter, and a lot of reasons to give up, a lot of reasons to blame other people. He was far from his home. He was a young man. His parents most likely were killed in a battle for Jerusalem. And he was among those that the king selected. One of the things that the Babylonian king did is he selected from his captives the best and the brightest to serve in his palace, and Daniel was numbered among those. So notice in verse 7 of Daniel chapter 1, to them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. So actually what they did is they renamed them after pagan gods in some cases. So if you can imagine what that must have felt like to a young man that grew up in Israel in a Hebraic culture, and now all of a sudden he finds himself in Babylon. I mean, the epitome, Babylon to this day epitomizes paganism, doesn't it? You know, even in Revelation, it talks about about Babylon the Great. And we see that culture, those cultural streams come down to our time. And in some ways, the more things stay the same, the more things change, the more they say they stay the same. But in verse 8, we find the first thing I want to call to our attention. Verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. This was a big step. This was huge, because back then, when you did not do the bidding of the king, heads rolled, and it was not a metaphor. Heads did literally roll on the floor because they'd chop them off. So this was a daring thing that he did, but the precondition to it was that he purposed in his heart to do it. And this, I think, is really, really important. If we make a commitment, it is really important that it is a commitment that, however uncomfortable it might be, and I think we need to be honest about this. Purposing in your heart does not mean that it is not difficult, or that there isn't a battle that is fought between your two ears. That is the case, and I think the more uncomfortable it might be, and perhaps as the risk goes up, the more important it is to purpose in our heart of hearts, like Daniel did, that this is something that we are actually going to do, irrespective of consequence. And we'll see that. We will see that. And that's also, when you make a commitment like that, it is at that time that it seems that God can intervene in in a dramatic way. What is also instructive here is how Daniel purposed in his heart. He was daring. He's a kid. He's talking to the eunuch of the king, and he said, nope, I'm not going to do this, except that he didn't quite say it that way. Notice in verse 9, now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of eunuchs. You don't normally do that by being obnoxious. He had already built a relationship with the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord, the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you will endanger my head before the king. And this is the head rolling part. It wasn't a metaphor. His head was literally on the line. Notice what Daniel said. This is how a purposeful heart works. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please, let's do a test. Now, I think this is probably the Reader's Digest version. They settled on a test for 10 days. I mean, I don't know. I'm just speculating here that maybe he said, give us a month. The eunuch said, no. I'm not going to be around if we do it for a month. Well, give me 20 days. Can we settle for 10? To be clear, I'm speculating on that. The Bible doesn't say that. It says 10. I'm just emphasizing here the fact that there was a negotiation that went back and forth. Instead of obnoxiously confronting the eunuch and saying, you know what, I am from Jerusalem, and you guys are pagans, I'm not doing this. He said, let's give this a try for 10 days. This is, I think, very instructive, particularly, this is a story I shared with my children when they were young. This is how you go to the feast. This is how you negotiate to get days off, not the other way around. Verse 13, then let our countenance be examined before you, and the countenances of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies, and as you so see fit, so deal with your servants. He said, okay, give us 10. Then examine us, and then do what you see fit. You know, he purposed in his heart to take the consequence. You know, if you think about it, here it was about wine and unclean food, and the reason, I mean, there was no prohibition about drinking of wine, but these delicacies were actually offered to the gods, and this whole thing was part and parcel of participating with a pagan worship service. So it was more going on than just, sipping on a little bit of wine. I mean, later, it was the lion's den. We'll look at that in a moment. But as a young man, he purposed in his heart and negotiated something that was found acceptable to the chief of the eunuchs. Verse 14, so he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their countenance appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Now, they were eating vegetables, right? There was a supernatural component to this, because you don't get fat in 10 days on vegetables, normally. But without Daniel's purposeful heart that he dared to do for 10 days, this would not have occurred. And of course, we read in verse 19 that the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and therefore they served before the king. It's interesting that their Hebrew names are recorded here, not their Babylonian names. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than their contemporaries. No, that's not what he said. He found them 10 times better as young men than all the magicians and astrologers who were within his realm. I mean, it's already set up a political dynamic where those people in those positions of power would become envious of Daniel and his compatriots. But it started by daring to purpose in his heart. You know, purpose is actually an antidote for worry. An antidote for worry. And this is something that in recent times, at least in the leadership circles that I'm involved in, intention and intentionality has become kind of a watchword. That we do things with intention. And there are other ways you could describe it. You do it after deliberation. And you think about what you're doing daily, and it has been measured. You know, people that do this are able to accomplish more consistently than when you just kind of wake up and let the day happen to you. Let's go to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. Verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. You know, this is a principle that ties with purpose and intention. I mean, if you are loyal, if Daniel would have been loyal to the king and said, well, you know, I'm a captive. I don't have any freedom of choice. You know, free moral agency was not yet invented back then. Daniel invented it, you might say. He could have made a whole list of excuses on why it was not possible for him to do what he purposed in his heart. But he chose to serve his God, not the king under which his servitude he had come. So we'll jump through here, and then I want to get to one particular verse. Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. It is not life more than food, and food and the body more than clothing. I know nobody in this room worries. It's just me that worries. If you believe that, then I've got a lot of things I could sell you. Or you could give me donations, or, just write out a check. Worry is is part and parcel of our human nature, but it's very damaging, and it prevents us from being purposeful. You know, if Daniel had worried about the consequence, it would have been, as worry is described in the New Testament, an enemy of his faith that would have prevented him from purposing in his heart to negotiate with the powers that be in a even-keeled manner, but recognizing that in the end, the chips would fall where they may. Verse 31, therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek. This is a decidedly Gentile pagan approach to leadership, to daily living, to personal integrity. I mean, these cultural things flow in broad cultural streams, you might say. The Gentile kings did what? Jesus said that they lorded it over you. The Israelite kings were always way more benevolent in their dealings with peoples that they conquered than the Gentile kings of that day. And that is a tendency, that is a cultural stream that has come down to this day. And if you look at what happened in World War I, or I should say World War II in particular, the United States and the Allies were extraordinarily generous and benevolent to the peoples that they conquered on mainland Europe. That was almost, if you talk about the Berlin airlift and the aid that was given, it was unprecedented, both in scope and in history. It's an Israelitish trait, not a Gentile one. For after all these things the Gentiles seek, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about its own things. Sufficient for today is its own trouble. Now, isn't that the truth? Somebody just said you got that right, okay? I agree. Usually by the end of my day, I've about had it, you know. It's sufficient for one day. The issue here is one of purpose and intention that we need to do daily. We need to just dare to do it today. Dare to do the right thing today. Because guess what? You can't undo what you did yesterday. Yesterday is always, I usually have something to regret. And tomorrow isn't here yet. Daring daily. Starting with purposing in our hearts like Daniel did. Point number two. You dare to make it known? Do you dare to make your purpose known? I pause because it's something to ponder on. And I think, and again, there are cultural things. You know, we have our culture in the church, we have the culture around us, and if I may dare, and I'll use myself as an example, I think we have perhaps in the church not always dared to make our purpose known. And I'm not talking about, being obnoxious or anything like that, but when you have opportunity to dare to make it known. Here's something that actually happened to me, or this is something that I did. Some of you have heard this story, so bear with me. We had an employee's son who wrapped his car around the tree and died a tragic death. And we were at their side for a couple of days, and the night before the service, and these are people that didn't go to church, the father said, "Would you say something tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure, just make sure it's okay with the pastor." So I found myself sandwiched in between two pastors. I remember Lauren saying, "What in the world are you going to say?" So I made some comments that I thought would be comforting and helpful. And the next day, one of my employees came to me and said, "John, I really appreciated what you said." And I thought, well, that's kind of nice, And I said something, he liked it, and that's kind of nice. But then there was but. But I didn't know you believed in Jesus Christ. that was a big but. I thought, hello? I mean, that could mean a lot of stuff, you know. And I understood why, because here's the side conversation that always happened at Christmas time. He was a good Catholic. Let's just say he was a Catholic. Okay, I don't know how you define the good part. A devoted Catholic is probably the right word. And he'd come to me before Christmas and said, John, I know you don't keep Christmas. I said, yeah, we don't keep Christmas. But I have this gift. This is not a Christmas gift. But I want you to have this. I really appreciate working here, and it's so nice to work with you and all that. So you give me this gift. I still have one of them on my desk. It's from the Forge down the road in Sugar Creek. So he concluded, you don't keep Christmas. You don't believe in Christ. I had not, whether dared is the right word, or neglected, I had neglected, at best, to make my purpose known. And that was a kind of a life-changing event for me. I think if you go to Superb Industries today and ask somebody that question, I think they would answer differently. Let's go to Daniel chapter 6. And this speaks to what we do daily and whether we do it in secret or openly. Daniel chapter 6, I'm going to read verse 10 under this point of daring to make it known. Verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed, giving thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. This is a remarkable scene here. And I'll just kind of fill in the details here. Belshazzar had fallen, and Darius became king, and Daniel immediately rose right back to the top. If you notice, in verse 3, then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Oh my. That caused problems. So they conspired and thought, how can we get Daniel? I mean, does that sound familiar today? You conspire and you try to figure out how to get him, but they realized that they couldn't get him. Now, if that would be me, it'd be easy. John has many faults and you know most of them. So you get together, it's easy to do. With Daniel, it was hard. So they figured out the only thing we can do is to do something that would cause him to compromise, that would put him in an awkward position where he would have to make a choice whether he serves Darius the king or the God that he's always worshipped. They figured, you think about how they conspired, they knew he wouldn't do that. So if he would not do that, then they would get favor with the king. Politics doesn't change. So they got Darius they said, long live the king. For 30 days, no one should worship anyone or any being except you, the king. That was common. That sounds, in our culture, the idea of worshiping a person or politician sounds like something we wouldn't do, except that we do. So they got Darius the king to sign the decree, and Daniel made it known what his position was. He went and did what he'd always done, prayed 3 times a day, as was his custom from early days, and he did it out in the open. Notice, in verse 11, then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication. So they were out there watching. They had their binoculars out, their night vision scopes. No, I'm just kidding. It was during the day. They found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God, and then they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And the king answered and said, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. I mean, he just walked right into it. And then they told him, well, Daniel, actually, let's just take a moment to read this, but it's really interesting how they put it. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, didn't say Daniel, that Daniel who is one of the captives of Judah does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times daily. It's a real gotcha. But Daniel dared to do it daily, in the open window towards Jerusalem 3 times a day. Think about what Daniel could have done. It was only 30 days. Move to your closet. Do it in private. I mean, he could have done that. Maybe it wouldn't have even been an issue. God might have accommodated that. But you know what? We wouldn't know about it. It would have never been recorded. And that's also something that I think we cannot underestimate, is the power of example, of doing the right thing. Dare to make it known, as Daniel did. And closely related that is dare daily to stand alone, except that we're not alone. It just looks alone. I mean, Daniel was not alone, but he stood. I mean, he knelt alone. By himself, by the window, in public. I mean, it was in his house, but it was publicly visible. That can be hard. And depending on your personality, it can be more hard or less hard. We make no mistake, peer pressure is not just for teens. We all acculturate to the circumstances and the people around you. I think there's a measure in leadership circles that says you are the average of your 5 best friends. So choose wisely. Because you acculturate, we tend not to stand alone. So how do we do this daily? I mean, it's really, really quite simple. You just push the comfort envelope a little bit. Do something you know is right by yourself, alone. That's how you stand. Or kneel or crawl. Great things, great exploits have happened that way. Let's notice what happened when Daniel, as we read here, stood alone. Verse 14. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself. He realized he'd been had. And set his heart on Daniel. Now notice the word heart came up here. So now it's the king that's purposing in his heart to he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. So if you think of the court of the king, and if you ever watched any movies about king's courts in Europe, it's always just absolute drama. Drama concentrates around power. Always has, always will. People gravitate to power and money. And, you find out when you don't have any money, then you find out who your true friends are. He labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. I mean, the king tried to dissuade his aides on how to deliver Daniel because he valued him. He valued him. And he recognized that he'd been had politically. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians." Now remember who had just said that a couple verses earlier? You want to go back and look at that? The king answered, verse 12, and said, "The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they read it right back to him. "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed." So the king gave command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid in the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Politics goes both ways. Verse 18, now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. And here you have a Babylonian king, pagan king, fasting at night. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. And the king spoke, saying, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Then the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed his God. I mean, this is a story that is almost universally known in Western civilization, because Daniel dared on that day to stand alone. He had a purpose. He purposed in his heart. He made it known consistently and continually, and was able to stand, even though, I mean, if we want to, let's just think this through for a moment. I don't know that God would have, God's servants in the Old Testament did much more egregious things than to pray in a closet for 30 days to avoid the political intrigue of the court. It's just that it would have never been known by half the people that live on the face of the earth. The fact that he was willing to dare on that day to stand alone is what made it a story that has survived for thousands of years. Point number 4. Point number 4, dare to pray. Now, what I'm going to do here is go to one of the most remarkable prayers from the Bible and then draw a contrast to, or connect it to is probably a better way to say it, the prayer that Jesus gave to the disciples when they asked, Lord, teach us how to pray. Daniel chapter 9. Now, I find this remarkable in again, Daniel was taken into captivity somewhere between 14 and 18 years old. 70 years later, he's reading the book of Jeremiah. We read that in verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years specified by the word of the Lord given through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. I think it was a couple of years later during the reign of Cyrus when they actually went back. But I mean, Daniel recognized, the time is coming close. We've done time. Today, people do time for crimes and disobedience of the law. I mean, that dynamic doesn't change, does it? There can be no culture or organization without laws and rules. I mean, it just doesn't work. Verse 3, then I set my face toward the Lord God to make request by prayer and supplication, with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. And I prayed. Notice the pronoun. I prayed. I prayed to the Lord my God, and made confession, and said, O Lord, great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and mercy with those who love him, and with those who keep his commandments. Think about it. This is really not that different from what Jesus said. Our Father, he said, we are to pray, which art in heaven. Hallowed be your name. I mean, the template really doesn't change. He said, O Lord, great and awesome God. I mean, the Father, Jesus came to reveal the Father. So there's a little bit of a name change. But the framework is the same. Notice verse 5. We have sinned and committed iniquity. We have done wickedly and rebelled, even by departing from your precepts and your judgments. We? I mean, Daniel is the one biblical personality about which I have not been able to find an example of an evil deed or a shortcoming that he had. I'm sure he had them because he acknowledges it later on in this prayer. But he didn't. He could have prayed, O Lord God, we have now suffered a long time for the sins that they committed back in the land of Israel and that our fathers committed in the wilderness and the sins that they committed. No, he didn't use that. He said, we have sinned. If you go to the prayer in the New Testament, you will find almost exactly the same verbiage. When the way Jesus taught us to pray, when the pronouns that refer to God uses the singular, our Father in heaven, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. It's communal. Give me my bread today. I mean, that would be the normal way to pray from a human standpoint. Give me, myself, and I. No, he said, give us this day our daily bread. Notice what it teaches us. It teaches us that daily dynamic. What's wrong with weekly bread or monthly bread? What's wrong with prepping? Okay? This does not, this shows, and of course it's in the context, and if you go, this is earlier in Matthew chapter 6 where we read, do not worry what you shall eat or what you shall drink, because you are to pray, this day give us our daily bread. And again, I think this is a good example of intention and purpose and attitude, while at the same time not dispensing with preparation, because we are also told, go to the ant, you sluggard, and learn of her ways. Store up in the summer for winter. But food can spoil, unless you use superb cannon lids, of course. Sorry. But the fact that you put food away does not take away from the fact that that food can be taken away. Verse 6. Neither have we heeded your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings and our princesses, and to our fathers and all the people of the land. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us, why didn't he use the word them? But to us shame of face, as it is this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all Israel, those near and those afar off, in all the countries to which you have driven them, because of the unfaithfulness which they have committed against you. So he did here use the word they. But at this juncture, at this time, the northern tribes had already been dispersed among the nations, among the Phoenicians and were moving northward and westward. They never came back. They never came back. Verse 8, O Lord, to us belongs shame of face to our kings and our princes and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To the Lord our God belong mercy and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. We have not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God to walk in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. Yes, all Israel has transgressed your law and has departed, so as not to obey your voice. Therefore the curse and the oath written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out on us because we have sinned against him. He takes responsibility for his entire nation, even though he is a man of impeccable character, about which the Bible mentions nothing negative. And he dared to pray that way. It is a model. If you want to read a good prayer, here it is. Dropping down, verse 15, And now, O Lord our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand, and made yourself a name as it is this day, we have sinned, we have done wickedly. O Lord, according to all your righteousness, I pray, let your anger and your fury be turned away from your city Jerusalem, your holy mountain, because of our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Collective, plural pronouns. It was us. It was we that sinned, not them. Now, therefore, our God, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplication, and for the Lord's sake, cause your face to shine on your sanctuary, which is desolate. Oh my God, your ear, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations and the city which is called by your name. For we do not present our supplication before you because of our righteous deeds, but because of your great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act. Do not delay for your own sake, my God, for your city and your people are called by your name. And then in verse 20, now while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering. We need to dare daily to purpose in our hearts, to make it known, to stand alone, and to pray. I'm going to conclude the sermon with a song. Daniel prayed. And for those of you listening online, we don't have a license to broadcast, so there will be no audio.